Basically, Walter Russell asked the question, can man be unconscious? And his answer is no, that we have always been conscious without the slightest awareness of it. And to me, that was more of a semantic thing where, you can say that you're unaware of being conscious, or you can say that you're unconscious. But for me, that can lead to certain issues when we really start to delve into the mind and delve into how we learn and things that can happen in our different states of consciousness. So, with that, I asked some questions about who defined consciousness in the modern era. And I said that was Rene Descartes, because he's the one who stated, I think, therefore I am. And I said maybe that should be reworded to I am, therefore I think. Kind of
That's a
read.
Walter Russell thing, no?
No, I mean, based on Walter Russell's teachings, I think he would say, I am, therefore I think, rather than I think, therefore I am.
It's actually in the book, that other book I'm reading.
Oh, really? Is it?
Yeah,
Oh.
I'll find the page for you. Yeah.
How
I'm
funny.
sure
So maybe I'm channeling Walt, right?
yeah.
Right. How do the definitions of unconscious and subconscious differ? That was question 3. And what I wanted to really show was that throughout, the study of the mind with Freud and with Jung and with all kinds of people, Swedenborg, all these different people I look at who have done what we'd call mind mapping, there is definitely a difference between the unconscious and the subconscious, and how do they differ. So basically, most people believe the subconscious is below the unconscious, and it's actually kind of more of like instincts and things that happen in your body that are programmed. The unconscious can be part of what we'd call the collective unconscious, as in what Jung talked about, where we're all tied in together through this neural network of consciousness, which we would call the unconscious. And then, and even Ibrahim Karim talks about the subconscious when we do mental dowsing. So make sure that when you're talking about the conscious, you actually have some differentiation between unconscious and subconscious. Next, how does Russell's view of the unconscious differ from the work of Mesmer and Erickson and hypnotherapy? As you know, I talked a bit about Mesmer and mesmerizing and hypnosis and his idea of magnetic fluid, as he called it, that runs through the body. And then Erickson with his work in hypnosis and his work with people by going past the conscious mind to where people can get through their traumas and deal directly with what it was they experienced and how they experienced it. And then that led to NLP, or neuro linguistic programming, which is where you can actually use hypnosis through word and tone and rhythm to program people by putting them in a trance state, which basically means that if you can give them plus or minus 7 bits of information, you can actually short circuit their brain kind of and put them into a trance state, and then they become much more open to suggestion. And then we talked a little bit about how is the subconscious used in mental dowsing, radiesthesia, and biogeometry. And I gave a brief discussion on that and how that worked. And if you're interested, you can go and watch the other videos. So that left us at number 7, which we're going to kind of change gears a bit here and talk about what is sleep according to Russell. So on page 71, he says sleep is merely the negative half of the wave cycle of electrical awareness or sensation. Wakefulness is the positive half. To look at the wave. So here's basically a wave per Walter Russell's definition. And what he's saying is that if you see this sine wave that goes up, back down again, and returns back, he says the error is that people look at the wave cycle from this C to C up here, which would be kind of this cycle here. And he's saying the truth is that the wave is actually from trough to apex. So it's this portion right here, which again, this is the wave that we have in the yin yang, right? If you put a circle around here, this would be the dark side, this would be the light side, this would be the yin yang. So he's saying that when we look at this is the true wave cycle, which is again right here. So what he's saying then is that sleep would be this negative half of this wave cycle, and that waking would be the positive half of the wave cycles. So, again, Walter Russell is a very great mind, and he's very to the point, but in reality, does anyone really experience, some may, a complete night of sleep and a complete day of wakefulness? And if you were to ask me, I'd say no. I'd say I vacillate at night. Sometimes I wake up, become conscious, and actually have to make an effort to get back to unconsciousness and sleep. And same thing during the day. Sometimes you have to, some people, you can fall asleep in the day, again, going to those trance states. So what does anybody have to say about Walter's opinion or Walter's that?
My
It's merely a negative half of the wave cycle.
My interpretation is he's not talking about the nighttime versus daytime, or when you should be sleeping or when you should be waking. He's really talking about like the state of consciousness. So I think that might be the difference between what you're saying and what he's saying.
Well, I guess we'd be saying the same thing, is that we would be saying that it's a cycle. It's a constant cycle that's happening throughout the day. That's not really a nighttime, daytime thing, a dark, light thing. Correct? I agree with that. Anybody else?
I'm not sure I'm clear on the difference between how you view the wave.
Okay, let's go back to that a little bit. So,
I mean, I get it physically, but I don't.
Well, what he's saying is that the error is that some people see so here's C, here's BB, here's C, here's C, BB, BB.
Sure.
So he's saying that a wave is commonly presumed to be that portion indicated between letters A, right?
Which is the same as C, right?
Correct. And so then he's saying the truth is, on the contrary, all waves are those portions indicated between letters BB and BB. So, it'd be from here, trough, to apex, right? So that's the wave right here, where other people believe that it's kind of, this is the wave,
Does that have meaning to other people on this call?
Well, the whole thing about Walter Russell is that this wave here is, this is what we would call the radiation, and this, could be what we would call the compression. And so within Walter's cosmogony, well, shoot, my buttons aren't working. We have everything proceeds from this black and white still magnetic light, and the wave goes out, and then here's this wave that's actually in here. Is kind of how it's formed. So this wave is the wave that we're talking about, which really, in his mind, would not even be this whole portion. It would only be from this to this, from trough to trough. So he wouldn't include probably these last pieces here within the yin yang.
I'm not sure that's what he meant.
Okay, what do you think he means?
Well, I'm thinking he means the whole thing that would be in the yin yangs.
Well, for the yin yang, it'd have to actually return back, and I guess this would be what he would call the yin yang. So you'd have to have the circle go around here, but within the yin yang, it actually does return back up a bit. And he's saying that it actually is just at the peak and the trough.
This is his drawing?
This is his drawing.
It has to always be equal. I mean,
Yes.
The two halves, no matter what.
Exactly. And even in the yin yang, they are equal. They just continued a bit longer.
It almost kind of reminds me of the breath, and how the breath is this kind of, circular thing, then it comes up to the top, it kind of hits the top of the breath,
Mhm.
but then it hangs for a while before it cycles back down. So it's almost like the pieces that he's chopping off both of those sides are like the momentum or something that's already there, that it doesn't add or contribute, it just continues. And that middle part that he's cut out is the kind of meat and potatoes of the whole waveform function. Does that make any sense?
Well, I think that for one, both these halves are equal, but we do have a descending side here, and we do have a rising side here that comes back to the equilibrium. So within his drawing that he's shown here, this drawing represents one wave of any substance. It is that portion which is known as crest and trough. So he's just looking at crest and trough as the actual wave cycle. So within the yin yang, we're actually returning back to stasis.
What would this be compared to the top two pictures? Which part, like if we look at the bottom one, that's
Well,
what you're talking
okay.
about.
Do you
Yes?
see this BB right here that I'm circling with my,
Yes.
okay, and you see this BB up here?
Yes,
That's the portion we're
Right.
talking about.
that's what I thought.
And that's what he's saying, that's the truth. On the contrary, all waves are those portions indicated between letters BB.
The other thing I read though that is similar, he was saying like the sun, and then there's like a black hole matching that sun.
Mhm.
So I thought that was great.
Yeah, well, and that goes back to the yin yang. I mean, the whole thing is that, and you just said it, that for every light, there has to be an opposing and equal dark. So
Yeah.
for the brightness of the sun, you'd have to have a black hole, but but within the yin yang, you have a small amount of darkness within it, a small amount of light within it, but they still match. We still need that. So within our world, we see the light, we don't see the darkness. That's because that's how we're set up, with our eyes. So we don't see black holes, we just see space. And so with what he's saying about sleep is that it's that negative half. So as we, and again, he calls it he calls it radiation and gravitation, where one's compressing and one's expanding, right? So if we're saying that the negative, so within the wakefulness, we'd probably say that that's when we're compressing, and when we sleep is where we're expanding.
What is it? Centripetal and the other one is
Centripetal and centrifugal.
yes.
Yes.
I never heard that other word before. The centripetal. How do you say it?
Centripetal.
Centripetal.
Yeah.
Never heard that word before.
And so-
I did learn that in physics class, that they're equal and opposing forces.
I thought
It's
it was
weird though.
centrifugal.
It's one against the other. Centrifugal is on one side. I believe centrifugal would be the radiation side, right?
Like if I spin this thing, right, there's a force through the string that's holding that pendulum from flying into the woods. But there's an equal force of this thing outward that wants to escape. So
Which one's the centripetal?
I think centrifugal is the outward force, and centripetal is the thing that's holding it. I actually forget. I'd have to look it up.
I think that's what I think too. The centripetal is the radiation, and
Yes. No.
right, and the other one's the gravity.
Like pedals, I guess.
I think centripetal is actually the one, the gravitation, and centrifugal is the radiation.
Okay.
Out. So within that, we can see that there's these two waves, right? And these, so when we're sleeping, it's just merely the negative half of the wave cycle. So what he would say is we're still conscious in sleep. I guess that's what this whole thing's about, that we'd still be conscious in sleep. It would just be the negative half of the wave cycle of electrical awareness of sensation. And wakefulness is the positive half. So when he talks about positive, negative, usually the positive is male and going into gravitation, and the negative is female and going out into radiation. Any more on that? Anything else from you, Grant, on that?
I guess where I get a little bit weary is, I guess we talked about this last week a little bit. So one of my observations is the more conscious humanity seems to get, and I mean conscious in the like awakened sense, like awaken to their true nature of who they are. The also like the equal and opposite thing, like the more unconscious another half of the population's getting. So like we kind of see this like wave growing of people becoming awake, and then this other negative side where they fall asleep. But then he says, you know, we cannot be unconscious. So I guess I would kind of wanted to clarify what's the difference between like this kind of awakening frequency. I don't know how you want to put it, because he defines it as all the same.
And
I don't know.
And that's why, like I said, I don't really think that's helpful. I don't think it's true. I do believe that we do have unconsciousness. We have we have what we call trance state, you know, and when we're in trance state, we can be somewhat conscious, but we're conscious at a different level. And, you know, when you talk about mystics, they can go into trance states and channel, you know, with higher worlds. And some are conscious and some are not. But depending on and again, that's why I said it's very imperative that we actually understand that we do have different levels of consciousness, because we have to tune into those states in order to do certain practices of meditation and I would say knowing with what he would call source. Because, and you know, I wasn't going to really get into this a lot, but you know, as we look at these two lights, right, and we have the radiation and we have the gravitation or the compression, and I know that some of you guys had seen maybe the video I posted on Ahriman and Lucifer and kind of the Steiner cosmology. And within that, we have what we would call the Luciferian urges, which would be actually the radiation urge of the magnetic light that comes out, because it's the expansion. Lucifer wants you to become, you know, so not material and just spiritual. So that would be this maximizing of the radiation. And then Ahriman wants you to become so dense that you become so solid, and you lose all sense of radiation or spirituality. So
Lucifer's better, are you saying?
No, I'm saying that it depends if you think that our existence should be totally spiritual, you know, and totally without form and because we're not on the earth to be totally spiritual. We've chosen to be here to be a portion of material. But once we get into just a Luciferic side, I'm saying that either extreme is not good. And these are the two forces that work against us as we are in the material. So as this light comes off, I think that we can bifurcate it ourselves, right? And not be balanced and begin to lean one way or the other, and begin to shift that into one or the other consciousness that is not beneficial to us as humans. So it's very important that we understand, as this two-sex light comes in, that we keep it in balance as we create our reality. Otherwise, we're going to get skewed realities that are not helpful to us and are very harmful. So during this, sorry, go ahead, Grant.
Is that like the essence of Christ's consciousness or Christ's teaching?
Correct. So Christ's consciousness is what would hold these two forces of the radiation and the gravitation, or the Ahrimanic and Luciferic, in balance. So it holds the tension between the two. So that is, you know, a little bit, because as we begin to talk about, you know, what may be going on in the world, and, you know, how some people are like, when you say they're unconscious, you know, I don't know if they're unconscious or they're just unbalanced. You know, they're on one side too much or one side or this side too much. And therefore, the view that they're seeing, the view that they're projecting is a different view than what the two sex light's intent is when it's balanced.
Fear.
Yeah, then, you know, then what the idea of God or whatever you want to call the source is coming out. It once it becomes unbalanced, and we're going to talk a bit about that later also. So I think that you're correct, but again, I don't know if it's just that they are becoming, you know, less conscious, or they're becoming almost more conscious of a different source, and they're focusing on that source. So any more on sleep and the wave cycle? Okay, the next thing we're gonna go ahead. Anybody? Okay.
I understand. I feel like we are conscious in sleep, and we can be conscious in sleep, and it's a very possible thing. And I think that a lot happens when we're quote unquote asleep. I think there's all sorts of communications that are going on. And just like you said, sometimes during the day you can fall asleep, and sometimes at night you can wake up in your sleep, wake up in your dream time, and become aware of that conscious sleeping cycle process. I think a whole lot happens when we're sleeping. So
there's actually a name for that, and the name for that is
Dreaming.
Hypnagogia, which is what we're going to talk about now.
Okay.
So, hypnagogia and active imagination. So, what is hypnagogia? It's Tibetan Buddhism dream yoga. And so we all know that there are two primary states of consciousness, wakefulness and sleep. So this guy's saying there's two primary states of consciousness. I agree with you. I believe that we're always conscious. It's really, we're on a different side of a wave, and it's really it's more of what reality we're experiencing than what consciousness we're in. Since our eyes are closed when we sleep, we can't be projecting any images, and we have to project them within, actually. And so we have the wakefulness and sleep. But did you know there's also in-between state? This state is called hypnagogia, a word that derives from Greek word hypnos, sleep, and agogos, leading, meaning the state that leads into sleep. So there is artist Salvador Dali, writer Mary Shelley, author of Frankenstein, and inventor Thomas Edison are some of the most notable historical figures who have used hypnagogia to stimulate inspired new ideas. Both Dali and Edison, for example, use very similar techniques of sitting down with objects in their hands, a key for Dali and brass balls for Edison, of course, and waking up once the object fell and hit the floor. The sudden awakening allowed them to quickly jolt out of their hypnagogic slumber and write down the thoughts and images that had been dancing through their minds. So with hypnagogia, what you're trying to do, as you might remember, like last week we talked about what you dream, you also create. So when you go to bed and you are tossing and turning and have a lot of stress and you have very restless nightmares, you're actually creating that in reality. And it's actually going into the collective unconscious. So a technique you can use, say, if you want to maybe guide, it's almost like a guided meditation where you're sleeping, you might put something in your mind and then begin to fall asleep. And I use a little Altoids container with pennies in it. I just hold it in my hand like this. And as I fall asleep, I'll drop it and I'll hear it hit the floor and rattle. And that will wake me up. And then you have a dream journal close by where you can write in it. And so you can begin to craft and shape your dream life. And you can actually begin to aid in how you're dreaming and where you want your dreams to go. So you can ask for, ascended masters. You can begin to talk to them. You can begin to do different things and ask for you know, the solution to things that are going on. And because most of the time we forget our dreams, you know, by the time we wake up. And also, you know, you're in the middle of the night and you're in a really heavy sleep. You get up, try to find your pen to write in your dream journal. It's a big deal. It's kind of tough. I've tried that. That's pretty awkward. So by doing this, we can actually begin to craft our dreams at a very subtle state, write them down, and then go to bed. And you may find that you will be able to remember them better in the morning. Also,
Question.
sure.
So you do this like right when you fall asleep, you're holding this, you're laying down, you got
No.
this kind of over the floor.
No,
And then
like say if I'm going to bed at 10:30, you know,
Yeah.
I may start doing this at 10 o'clock.
Hmm.
I may actually set my intent and just sit down and do this. Now I'm not, because like I
And-
said, you could do it at 10:30 but you know, it usually takes me about, you know, I have to get tired enough to where I need to go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you know, about 10 o'clock, 10:30. And then I go into this dream state, but usually I'm doing it in a chair. But some, like Edison would do it in the middle of the day. If Edison would do it, like say if he had an issue, like if he had a problem he needed to solve, he would just go and do it during the day also. So, you know, it's not, he wouldn't use it just for dream states. He would use it all times of the day to, but you know, he worked 24/7 too. But
you basically go into your sleep with a particular question or intent.
yeah,
And then when you wake up, the dream will happen kind of right before you fall asleep, essentially.
well, I think that you're probably right. When you hit REM sleep is when
Yeah.
you'll drop what it is that you have
Yeah.
in your hand.
Yeah.
And that's what I've experienced. And
Yeah.
sometimes, you know, it feels like you've been there for, you know, hours and it's only been a few
Oof.
minutes. You need to, so it's a technique that's been used, like I said, since the Greeks. I mean, it's been done for a long time, but it does aid in helping with your dream life and actually helping with communing with different planes of existence. Any more questions on hypnagogia? Anybody here practice hypnagogia besides myself? Okay.
No, I'd love to know more, because I'm really interested in connecting to getting guidance from spirit on a lot of issues.
So
I
then go ahead.
I don't practice it like that, but I'm actively every single night when I go to sleep, I'm talking to my higher selves and different planes of existence and asking for support on this or that, or DNA, you know, downloads. But I always, you know, address my going into the sleep realm as a waking realm, and as a potentially productive realm. And then when I wake up, I do have a journal, and I most often write, and sometimes I just don't feel like writing it, but I usually do recall what it is. And it's a conscious process, and I just seem to get better at it as I continue to, you know, talk to it and work with it. So I think there's a lot of different ways to access that knowing on that part of the sleep wave.
And so from hypnagogia came our friend Carl Jung. And he started what he calls active imagination, which I call the second AI, or with the original being Akashic intelligence. The second is active imagination. Active imagination is a method developed by Carl Jung, assimilating unconscious contents, dreams, fantasies, etc., through some form of self-expression. The object of active imagination is to give a voice to sides of the personality, particularly the anima, animus, and the shadow, that are not normally heard, thereby establishing a line of communication between consciousness and unconsciousness. Even when the end products, drawing, painting, writing, sculpture, dance, music, etc., are not interpreted, something goes on between creator and creation. The first stage of active imagination is like dreaming with open eyes. It can take place spontaneously or be artificially induced. The second stage, beyond simple observing the images, involves a conscious participation in them, the honest evaluation of what they mean about oneself, and a morally and intellectually binding commitment to act on the insights. This is a transition from merely perspective or aesthetic attitude to one of judgment. So with active imagination, you're actually having, it's more of like, as your eyes are open and you are thinking about something that you want to accomplish. Could be a piece of art, it could be other things, music and so on and so forth. But as your eyes are open, you're actually kind of channeling, you're seeing, you're imagining, and you're seeing, but you're kind of not in a conscious state of thinking about it. You're just performing the activity. So you're more in a trance state of feeling and knowing, and not so much of thinking and analyzing.
They're called daydreaming.
Could be daydreaming, but usually with daydreaming, you're not trying to produce anything.
Ah.
I mean, that's a little bit different between daydreaming and active imagination, is that you're trying to actually have this honest evaluation of what they mean about oneself, and intellectually binding commitment to act on the insight. So you're, unlike with daydreaming, you don't have a real purpose. With active imagination, you set an intent and a desire, and then do it with your eyes open. So it's almost like, a open-eyed, interactive meditation.
So I actually do this with my dream work. I set the intention to remember my dream. I keep a notebook, my journal right by my bed. And whenever I wake up, the first thing I do is write in my journal everything that I remember about the dream. And it's actually pretty fruitful. When you set the intention like that, the subconscious starts to speak to you. And I think Paula mentioned that she does something very similar with setting intention. But yeah, this meditation sounds very familiar.
But again, this active imagination is usually when you're trying to create something at the same time. So you have paintbrushes in your hand, you're trying to do automatic writing. There's things that you're trying to do, and you're actually, at this point, you're trying to pull things from the subconscious. So like what you would write or what you would draw would have some deeper meaning. The actual production of what you're producing in the physical is taking place of the dream itself. You're actually drawing the dream as you are in the state of active imagination. So it's like,
So I've heard of mathematicians who are faced with a problem and they ramp up the problem in their mind just before they go to bed, and then they'll wake up with a solution.
Again, active imagination would be more, I ramp it up in my mind, I go into a trance state, and then I'm sitting down with pen in my hand, and my hand begins to what they would call auto write, right? I'd begin just writing right there. I'm not sleeping and waking up. I'm in that state the whole time, and I'm creating it'd be like as I am dreaming, I'm dictating to somebody, myself, what it is I'm seeing, and they're drawing it or writing it out for me. That's a little bit different, because again, the key is it says active, right? So you're being active in imagination. And Jung uses a lot within his, personality disorder work with people. So they would write things out or draw pictures of what they were seeing or feeling, and going past the conscious mind and asking questions. Any more questions on active imagination?
I can understand why Edison would do it during the day.
Mhm.
So that he might get a full night's sleep otherwise.
Yeah. All right. So let's go back to the next question. So what is knowing? So from page 72, conscious awareness. Unawareness means one does not yet know. So this kind of gets back to question 1, where we have, can man be unconscious? And the answer was no, we have always been conscious without the slightest awareness of it. And so conscious awareness is that we are aware of our consciousness. Unawareness means one does not yet know. So any comments on that, of knowing? We've often talked in the past, in the earlier classes, about knowing that it was actually straight from source, and it really had no thinking involved with it. We were not using the analytical mind, and it was more of a sense that, and I think I shared actually a video from Carl Jung where he was being interviewed in the 60s, and they were asking,
Yeah.
do you
I remember.
believe? Do you believe? And he says, I don't
I
believe,
know, yeah.
I know. And he took a lot of crap for that, because he was saying that, he wasn't being analytical enough, and he was just kind of, but, like I said, in my opinion, that's probably one of the most spiritual things that Carl Jung really ever said on camera, was that he actually had a knowing for certain things, and there was no believing and there was no thinking about it. It was just a pure knowing. So what Russell's saying is that unawareness, or not being aware of something, means that we just don't know yet.
I think the word assumption comes up for me. I did an in-depth week-long somatic-based epistemics workshop about 20 years ago. And it was with Gary David. He wrote a book on epistemology, how do we know what we know? And it was just this rabbit hole after rabbit hole of, well, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that? And it brought, everybody just at one by one, we each broke down. And I know that you're trying to get to something different here, but that process of knowing, conscious awareness, unconscious awareness, it's just interesting how this is kind of split up here in a different way. Because knowing, there would be no assumption whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's the definition of knowing here? I guess I'm kind of looking for where's the bottom, where everything falls out in that baseline.
Yeah.
How are you defining it?
Well, his answer is conscious awareness. So what is knowing? It's conscious awareness. So once our conscious becomes aware of something, there is no thinking, right? It's just, we know it. It's awareness that we know it. And so unawareness means one does not yet know. So what he would be saying is that if you're thinking about it, if you're believing something, you're still chewing on it. You're still mulling it. It's still running around within your electric brain. So either you know or you don't know. There's really no in between. There's no believing. There's no thinking. I think this, I think that. Either you know it or you don't. Everything else is just mental gymnastics, or some type of thing in which you're trying to become aware of the knowing. Because if you're seeking source, then you're being told directly what it is. If you're seeking analytical mind to prove to somebody else, because I think that's the issue, is that if I know, the first thing someone may ask me is, how do you know? If I say, I just know, they're not going to accept that, and I'll be seen a fool, just as Jung was when he said it. So, one, how much do we stand by our conviction of knowing, or do we need to explain to people how we know? Or can we just say, I know, I've experienced it, I know? Doesn't mean that there aren't other ways, but that could be your way of knowing. That's not my way of knowing. I know. And that's kind of where Walter Russell was, and that's how he teaches. His statements are very black and white, just as his two-sex light is. It doesn't have much to interpret or to much gray area within what he's talking about throughout this book. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that these answers I'm giving are his answers. And then I look for discussion from you, from the group, as to, what do you guys think about that answer?
Well, to Paula's point, it sounds like the assumptions only become important if you're trying to explain what you know to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Am I off base?
Or not even that. I mean, when I was asked challenged on my assumptions, where it brought me was the most interesting thing. Really, right up to the edge of insanity, really, because there was nothing to stand on. There was nothing. No. It was black hole.
Ooh, that sounds
So, huh?
That sounds very precarious.
Well, do you think that's because you were standing on a basis of facts and thinking rather than actually pursuing those questions of certain things through knowing?
I'm not sure I quite understand that, what you just asked.
in the
It was
Bi-
over 20 years ago, so I was quite a different being.
Well, in the Bible,
But
Christ tells a story of building your foundation on rock, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And that when the storms come, he who has his foundation built on rock will not, be destroyed, right? The house will not be destroyed versus that one who built his house on sand. And I don't believe, at least for myself, that I was ever taught to build a foundation on rock. I was always taught to build my foundation on sand, which was through thought, which was through thinking or through books or through learning, not really seeking a source, not really seeking it through meditation or through a knowing or through an interaction with anything. Or so when that happens, that's when we know. Then our entire lives are built on sand in a sense, or on the abyss, because we see that there is no foundation there. And
Interesting. So you're posing that the foundation is knowing.
the foundation is knowing, which is source.
The sand building on your sandy soil is thinking, because it can't ever answer the question.
Correct.
I think knowing can only happen through connection.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's the foundation. And I don't believe that we've been taught that.
It's like the three little pigs.
No.
Mm-hmm. The three little pigs with the straw until the brick house or something.
And so, go ahead.
I have a little bit different angle on this. The way I see it is like knowing comes when you stop trying to know. In other words, like when you get out of your own way, the ego wants to be that voice. And for me, true knowing comes from consciousness. So it's almost like a surrendering to the unknown, and then consciousness can have its space to come through. But if you're there saying, no, this is how the universe works, I want to tell you about all these truth lessons, and try to shove it down someone's throat. I call it like opening the fire hose. People aren't ready for the fire hose. And whenever you challenge someone, you're actually challenging them to either stay where they're at, like challenge someone with a new idea or something. I think you're actually you're coaxing them to either grow, evolve into this new thought form, or stay where they're at and reject it. And that's really the choice that they have, whether or not they buy into your truth And if you're speaking from like universal truth, like truth with the capital T, that's like universal to all of us, is not a lot of arguing with it. I don't know.
Yeah. And with my story of Jesus, not saying you have to believe in Jesus again. I'm just saying that's what he said. Because that knowing is you. You are divine. It's always been there. It's just that now you're becoming aware of this knowing. It's now that, you know, like you said, you've gotten out of the way, and you're aware of this knowing that's in you, which the other people have told you is not there because they wanted you to explain. Again, if we get back to how do you put somebody in trance, or how do you become NLP with them, is that the first thing you ask them is you find out what they believe, and then you ask them because. And once you do that, you can confuse them and put them into trance state. If that person doesn't say because, if you start asking them all this, why do you believe that? You say, because I know. They can't put you into a trance state. You know, NLP does not work because it doesn't get your mind tied up in trying to think about why you believe what you believe.
That's a really interesting idea that I'm just thinking about, you know, some upcoming conversations that I need to have, and that the knowing or the facts won't get you there. Like at the end of the day, even for myself, I can study and research and read as many news articles on every single side of issues going on in the world, but I know what I know. And I can't change someone else's knowing through facts. In fact, I can't change anyone's knowing, I guess, is the point. My knowing is my knowing.
Unless you put them in.
No.
Unless I allow myself to think that the facts will change my knowing, I guess. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Like you have all these dots on a map, and every person can draw lines between the dots in their own truthful way, and everyone draws the lines probably different in different orders. So you have the same data points, but it depends on how you draw the lines, whether or not they match up or something.
And this is not to say that your knowing is not based in a reality of experience and relationship. You have to have spent some time seeking knowing. I would say that children would probably have knowing very young, and then they're told that they don't have it, or they have to learn this, or they're told this is a tree and that's an orange, and this is how we do things. And whatever was their intuitive knowing that they had gets lost, pushed aside and aside. So for us, you know, at the stage and level that we're at, since I was not trained in this manner, I would have to go into much more meditation, much more seeking, much more hypnagogia, you know, many different stages to actually now achieve a better sense of knowing. But once I commit to that, once I actually, you know, say that this is what I'm going to commit to, and I'm going to, you know, do this, then my idea of knowing becomes much more ingrained in me, in my soul.
It feels, I'm making a connection with this knowing as we're discussing it and working on the causal plane, and it feels like the kind of almost like a prerequisite or a somewhat of a foundation for working on causal plane situations, or does that make sense?
Well, yes, and it's, you know, oftentimes people will say you have to live as if, right? You have to live as if you're in that now. And so people that can't live in abundance now, and they're waiting for it, to know that we are abundant, that we are this way, that sense of knowing. If someone says, well, you're not abundant, you don't have any money. Yes, I do. Okay, I am abundant. I am a child of God, or whatever. I am divine. This knowing sense is, I can only say it's experiential, within, yourself, your soul, rather than a concept or an idea in your mind. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here, I think, coming up. Should we do it now? Sure. So I don't really have any diagrams on this conscious awareness or unawareness. I couldn't find anything from Walter Russell on that. So the next question we're going to ask here a bit is, did Walter Russell have too narrow a view of consciousness? And I think Grant hit on this last week as we were talking. And, within our channel, I know Doug's participated in it. We at one time, it's been quite a while ago, it's farther back than what I thought, but we were talking about the toroidal field of the body and how it works, and that the center of that toroidal field is actually the heart. The brain has nothing to do with any of it. So when they check out this toroidal field here, which, as you can see, here's a torus on both sides, that the heart is a huge electromagnetic generator. And when we go back to Russell, we talk a lot about the electromagnetic light. So, Walter Russell talks a lot about the brain and about the mind, and we often all associate the mind with the brain. It's kind of just what we've learned. But what we're finding here is the heart-brain connection. So what this says is most of us have been taught, I think this is from Heart Math, have been taught in school that the heart is constantly responding to orders sent by the brain in the form of neural signals. However, it's not as commonly known that the heart actually sends more signals to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. Moreover, these heart signals have a significant effect on brain function, influencing emotion processing as well as higher cognitive facilities, such as attention, perception, memory, and problem solving. In other words, not only does the heart respond to the brain, but the brain continuously responds to the heart. So, and then we have the heart as ruler of the brain. So if anyone knows Aristotle, who the way that Western philosophy or culture in philosophy went was, it went, Socrates was the teacher of Plato, and Plato was the teacher of Aristotle, and Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great. So what Aristotle said was, Aristotle considered the heart as the center of reason, thought, and emotion, senior to the brain in importance. A 9th century Arabic philosopher Abu Nasr al-Farabi believed that the ruling organ in the human body is the heart. The brain is a secondary ruling organ subordinated to the heart. Auguste Comte, the 19th century French philosopher, declared that the brain should be servant to the heart. So as we go through, this discussion of conscious, subconscious, unconscious, we've really focused on the brain a lot. And we've talked about the brain, and even Russell talks in some of the first courses we gave and chapters we gave were on the brain, because there is a electrical circuitry going on there. But we also have a thing called the heart. And the connection between the heart and the brain is imperative for us to actually make, for us to discern. And one of the key things that Walter Russell talks about is desire. And I don't know if anybody really thinks that desire comes from the brain. I would say it would have to come from the heart, or from at least the gut and the sacral chakras in here. So do you think that Russell may have too narrow a view of consciousness? Anybody on that?
Well, I'm always remembering people encouraged to listen to their heart. which is what we're talking about.
Mhm.
And no, it's not too narrow if that's what he's trying to say.
Well, no, he's not trying to, he's never
Yeah.
mentioned the heart. He never
Yeah.
mentions the heart. That's what I'm saying. Should we be mentioning the heart? Should we be talking more about the heart? Should we be
Yep,
talking more
absolutely.
the connection between the brain and the heart-brain connection, as heart math
Sure.
is now
Right.
working on.
Is
When I
this
used to,
diagram his?
Hmm?
Is this diagram of the
No.
torus his?
No, this is not his.
Okay, so that he didn't get it.
No. Well, that's my question. But what was his view too narrow?
Dr. Paul Purcell, he's a heart surgeon, and I quoted him in my work some 20 years ago, and he made a quote about the heart, that there may be how many trillions, there may be more cells in the brain than there are stars in the Milky Way, but the heart is 5,000 times more than 5,000 times more electromagnetically powerful than the brain.
Mhm.
Now is that science from, over 20 years ago.
Mhm.
So we already know that the heart is more electromagnetically powerful and more resonantly powerful, and has more informational capacity to than the brain. So as organs speak. So yeah, I would say yes, he does have too narrow of a view of consciousness, and he's missing a huge part, which makes me question a lot of his work, actually.
Well,
Great.
again,
You know,
what I would say is, as I was talking about the twofold light coming out here, right? I would say that Walter Russell was much more on the male side, or the compression side, the gravitational side, and a lot of what he was doing. A lot of his work was in the compression of reality, right? This is all about compression of the compression wave, not so much on the radiation wave, which is what, when Leo came in, his wife began to open that up a little bit more. So Walter doesn't talk much about the heart. He doesn't talk much about feelings. And these are different levels of being, of not of within consciousness. There, it's broken down into different levels, right? Into the different bodies that we talk about. And each of those bodies, whether they be the emotional body, the etheric body, or so on, actually is what helps us to create this reality. Once it goes through all this, right, this body right here, this antenna, this projector projects more than light, right? It's influenced by our feelings, our other bodies, our other dense bodies, that then push this out. So I mean, if my emotional state is one of despair and fear, and what am I pushing out? Would it be the same view I see when I'm full of joy and hope and love? I would say no. You could see the exact same thing. You could be looking at the exact same ocean or house or dog, whatever it is you're looking at, but your perception of it would be totally different in what you're seeing. So
I would even extend it to say that each of the different chakras is a mind center. This isn't Russell, but this is someone similar. He says, for each of the 7 mind centers is a vortex of spiraling energy powered by a subset of spectral emanation, producing living colors that resonate with the specialized intelligences, combining to form the archetypal blueprint of light that projects the holographic thought form of the atomic image into matter. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that's what I have down here. If you can see this, right? This is actually kind of like the chakra in yoga, right? With the different forms, almost, what they would call, the unfolding and folding, right? That's going on to create the different forms of matter. And each chakra does play a point in that, a part in that. So that's why I also included this, because there is a lot more to consciousness than just a one consciousness that has, it's a multi-layered consciousness that's influenced by many different waves and energies. And how we emote that, how we come into our physical structure, you know, into our compilation of our reality, I believe would be influenced by these different bodies and how each one's functioning. And what I'm being told now is that our heart brain chakra is very weak. We're really dealing most of our reality today, especially with what's going on, we're dealing down here in the lower chakras. And in order to actually get out of some of this and maybe help our friends and our families and our neighbors, is that we actually have to work out of this portion of the chakras and get away from these lower chakras that we're vibrating in right now.
Maybe I'm completely missing the boat, but I'm feeling, it's funny because I'm watching my mind and I'm watching my body. I'm feeling almost irritated and like, what? That he split this. I'm a somatics, gal through and through, and that he's taken this, what I would say is like the breath, there's a top of the breath and there's a bottom of the breath. And two of the most, the places of the knowing of that is the still point when the breath comes up to the top, and there's a moment where it hangs before it starts to move the other way, and so at the bottom. So to take out the middle of the wave and then to say it's all happening in the middle, and to take out the transition points breaks reality up to a way that maybe I'm missing the boat. But why the F would you do that? And how does that serve? Maybe and it seems to me you're chopping the knowing right, you're just cutting it, you're fragmenting the continuity that is knowing and is the basis of all life, is the continuity, the connection of everything. So am I missing, what am I mean, please help me if I'm completely missing something as to why you would do that.
The discussion you're having is really, what I'm showing, what I'm proposing. And the question is, as we look at Russell's work with consciousness, now that's not to take anything away from his work he's done, but was he maybe skewed to one side a little too much? Because again, like I said, he did a lot of art. He manifested a lot of beautiful things. He knew a lot about machines and had new ways of doing that, and he was finding that from source and through probably, I would say, more active imagination is what he was kind of doing, which was manifestation with your eyes open. But was he maybe missing the heartfelt, the warmth of our humanity, and maybe too much just within the conscious realm of mind knowing himself? Again, I'm just playing with this question. I'm not looking for any exact answer. I'm just throwing it out there.
I mean, it just seems like this mental gymnastic of trying to separate the connection.
Could it be just a misinterpretation of what his original intention was? Maybe he wasn't talking about mind from the mind, but mind from
No, he's talking about mind from the source.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is he writes about the brain pretty much extensively. Only. He doesn't have a chapter on the heart or on any other systems in the body that are actually functioning. His premises that we've covered to date have been that we get caught up in the sensing mind, right? We get up in the sensing mind and believe that to be us.
Sure.
We believe that to be who we are, and we miss the knowing. But there's more than just the brain that we believe to be us. There's emotions, there's feelings, there's all kinds of things that float around that have neurons and that may actually have more thinking and sensing than the brain itself. The brain has no sensing whatsoever, right? It doesn't feel. It has. No one can say I've reached out and touched something, right? So what Walter Russell would say, well, your hand is only a generator of sense of feeling, and it would do nothing but send that signal to the brain, and then the brain would determine what it is. And what we're looking at here, and with some of the newer sciences that we're seeing, which is being substantiated, is no, the liver may also, and this is something that Steiner talked about. No, the liver, may have its own sensing and knowing. Each of these things, which are kind of, again, representation of planets. Each of our organs is kind of a representation of a planet, and an energy signature may know more than our brain itself.
I believe that.
And so that's why I'm just asking this question, because we're not, like I said, out of all the chapters that I've read of Russell so far, this is probably the most disappointing. But it's not something that he was really into. Now, when you read the book, The Divine Iliad, he seems to speak from the heart more. But within this book, he's not really covering that aspect.
Yeah, I was trying to prove you wrong, but you're right.
That's what I got you guys here for.
In the Divine Iliad, yeah, he's always speaking from the heart, and much more so than Secret Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
That other one, the new consciousness, whatever it's called, a new example of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
new concept of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
He's got all of it in there.
Well,
That's the instructions to the scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that each of the organs have their own knowing and their own correlation with other dimensions. And that's Edgar Cayce and Atlantean type of, base. Right, yeah.
So I just kind of threw this question out here because as I began to think about the consciousness and how he kind of missed out on some of the other views of consciousness, maybe he missed out on a lot more. And not to say that, again, I'm just reading this book and we're just talking about this book, not his overall work and life. But within this, is he missing out some pieces that will affect what we actually see? So one of the next questions he asks is, what is pain? And from page 72, he says, pain is when the body is unbalanced and produces a too intense electrical current voltage from the nerve to stand the strain. When the body is in balance, there is no sensation. So he's not really saying what causes the pain. He's just saying pain is when the body is unbalanced. So as we get into an unbalanced state, we then experience pain. And again, it's an electrical current voltage for the nerve to stand the strain. And when the body is in balance, there is no sensation.
Wow, I don't agree with that. When the body is in balance, there is no sensation.
I think this is getting back to kind of the Buddha thing, is that if we are in the 0 point of nirvana, say we're in a trance state, we're in a meditative state, that we've left our body, that we've left sensation, that we're not feeling, because we're kind of out of the body and we're into the knowing. And so,
and I wonder if he's referring to a different kind of sensation. because here we're talking about pain, and I like, I guess there's certain experiences I've had in life where I feel so in tune with myself and my environment. It's often like, you know, playful moments with my kids in nature, for example, where my awareness is at such a different level, a different height, and I feel my entire being just feels connected with everything around me, that I'm, you know, my experience has been like, when I shift out of that, that's when I start feeling like, oh, I'm going to follow this log, or I'm just not as stable. And maybe it's a different, maybe what he's talking about here is different when he says there's no sensation. Like, I think there's no, I'm so connected that there's no individual, I don't know. I'm trying to justify why he would say that, I guess.
Well, maybe when the body's in balance, it's connected to everything.
Yeah, that's kind of my experience. When I'm in
That
state.
that tense integrity of being connected to everything, where there would be no pressure anywhere, because you'd be ultimately, you know, connected, fluidly connected with all that is.
Exactly.
Another way of saying it would be like, if everything was blue, there would be no more blue, because you need, like, you know, other colors to make blue happen, you know.
No.
Hmm.
Isn't blue one of those source colors?
Oh, you can place it for red out.
The primary color. Yes. it is.
Yeah, there you go. That's the word.
So, you know, again, he does. We've all these questions we spent. You know, we're gonna have 4 hours of lecture on these questions, and it's really only 3 pages long, right? And I think I'm just saying I think that this sleep, pain, unconsciousness, which are pretty big areas for me within the idea of how we know and how we learn and how we are, he hasn't put much into, or maybe he just didn't want to, or I don't think it was his area of real study. He was more into the spheres and the nature of reality and so on and so forth. So the one thing that I do want to talk about right here is, you know, where do we stand on pain today, and what are maybe some other ideas of consciousness and pain? And so the next thing we're going to go to is to our friend Melisa Sell and see what she has to say about German New Medicine. So, in German New Medicine, what is the cause of pain? Well, from the German New Medicine perspective, musculoskeletal pain is due to the healing phase of a self-devaluation conflict. There is a very interesting type of conflict which serves its biological purpose after the biological program is completed. While you are actively in a pattern of self-devaluation, your body is receiving the message, I am not strong, smart, beautiful, worthy enough. So what German New Medicine is seeking to say is that pain is not, I mean, it may be an electrical, that may be its base nature, that there is an electrical current going through you, but there's also this emotional body side, that we're feeling something in our body, and that may be what causes this over stimulation of the nerve, but it may just be, I don't know. So Walter Russell's looking at it in a purely thought form way, right? Everything else he's looked at to date, he's really been in more of a esoteric way, maybe, or a spiritual way, or, you know, a knowing way. But when it comes to this, he's pretty much just thought form. You know, this is what it is. It's a overload of the nerve. So, you know, within German New Medicine, for example, say, you know, if you have intellectual self-devaluation, you have neck pain. If you have relationship self-devaluation, you have shoulder pain. If you're feeling unsupported or humiliated self-devaluation, you get lower back pain. Physical performance self-devaluation, you find it in the knee. Right? The intensity of the self-devaluation determines which tissue type will be involved. So mid self-devaluation equals fat, blood, vessels, right? Moderate self-devaluation equals muscles and lymph. Severe self-devaluation is when you actually start getting bones. So within this, where, you know, the German New Medicine is actually saying that pain is caused by emotion.
Hmm.
Now, whether emotions, you know, and again, I would even say it would go farther up into the spiritual realms, right? It, you know, as above, so below. But these are being manifest. The next level would be the emotional body, right? How that spiritual body is being reflected in the emotional body and so on. And this is from Dr. Melisa Sell's website.
I love that you brought this in.
Yeah, this is powerful.
Yeah,
So,
very.
any thoughts on this, on pain and the body and the mind and consciousness?
I resonate a lot more with this than the other stuff that Russell was putting out.
Completely.
Hmm.
And, you know, what I would say is, it's funny because as I've been, you know, talking about this, I talked to quite a few people that either watch the videos or have questions about Russell, and they'll talk to me. And I do find people that are more associated with the heart find Russell harder to grasp, and those that are more centered in the mind find him more understandable. And I think that it really may have a bit to do with our perspectives on how we know. If we, even though Russell believes and states that he all-knowing is not in the brain, I think he's very influenced by the brain in many ways, and not by the heart. And so I brought this in because if we're not influenced by the heart, we miss a lot, in my opinion.
This feels much more connected with our innate intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the billions of years of programming and experiential wisdom and evolution and knowing bacteria, back to bacteria, etc. So this feels more grounded and more real and more connected. And the Russell stuff feels a little more heady and abstract and less connected and less human, less fleshy, less biological, less, you know, grounded in living systems.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
In defense of Russell, I have to say this. This is like the worst chapter in the book.
I've said that many times.
Well, this may just not have been of his area of expertise, so, you know, so to speak.
But I did feel I should put more in there rather than just teach the chapter as it was. I don't think it was, like I said, I think that was almost dangerous in some instances because he didn't go deep enough, and some of the state to build on that was like building a straw man. And so I did not want to do that. All right.
Well, thank you for adding this to it, Will. This brings the humanity back into it. It brings our evolution, our biological heritage into it.
Okay. So now let's look at what he says about what charges the human batteries. From page 73, we get the sun. The sun is the generator, but the earth is turning toward and away from its generator constantly. So, as we look at one of his diagrams here, which I don't want to upset any of the flat earthers, but when people ask me, did Walter Russell think the earth is flat? Well, from his diagram, he didn't draw it as flat.
Mm-hmm.
He drew definitely an elliptical. But what he's saying is that the human body receives its signals and its charging from the sun. And I would personally say not only from the sun, but from all the other planets within our solar system. They're all sending us energy and light. And also from the earth, because the earth receives it and we ground with it. And I believe that we charge the earth and the earth charges us also. So within this, it shows that Russell is saying that, we're being charged from space. But it also, I don't know if the man's generating this or we're also being charged from the earth, because that's not what he says. Says these are but, so any comments on the earth and the sun charging us? Because we don't forget the title of this book is The Secret of Light, and that within the light, within the wave lies the secret of creation.
I feel like there are a lot of more tangible things that I've been exposed to that give this abstract concept, link it more to what I consider reality, like the practice of sun gazing, the practice of grounding, sun on the body and the benefits of that. So I would agree with this. It does feel abstract to me. And yeah. I don't know if that was a limit of how far he went with some of this knowledge, or if this is a foundation off of which other people have gone, or if there's like a knowing that people have kind of seen this from different angles, I suppose.
Again, I will, I'll be with Grant, and I will defend Russell in saying that out of all the chapters I read, this was the most disappointing.
Which happens to be the one that I joined.
Yeah, exactly. But we are going to move on to the next chapters next week, and I think we will get more plugged in as we begin to examine those and actually, look at Russell as we, the reason that I'm doing this is to learn what Russell had to say, but it's also to develop my own sense of knowing and my own sense of being able to discern. And so I want to look at Russell through anything that we've been learning through what we've been seeing and discussing. And that's why I just don't want to give lectures. That's why I want to have a group to discuss it. Like I said, I'm happy if you don't agree with what I'm saying. It's fine with me. Because within that, I begin and get more knowing from the collective unconscious or conscious. So any more discussion on being charged, getting this charging from the earth? I know, Doug, you've done a lot of work with Russell and on his new vision of the universe. Has he talked anything about the sun and what you've read today?
He talks that the sun is, the ring comes off the sun, creates the planets, and that the planets are smaller in close in because they're more compressed and they get bigger as they go out. He even says Mars would be bigger than Jupiter by the time it gets out there, or Mercury, I think.
So why is that?
They're created by the ring. From the, I mean, just like constantly it's happening from what I'm reading.
But they're constantly.
Maybe it depends on its age. Maybe it's a process, but it's billions of years with the sun. It keeps creating more though. I mean, it's like Jupiter Saturn has the ring, and it's created 4 moons from that ring that he claims.
Yeah, I would like to know what you all think about the galactic sun. The Mayans talk about, we have our sun, and then our sun rotates around the galactic sun. So like cycles, galaxies cycle around another central sun. What's interesting is, Crow 777, he talks about like the spiritual sun, and I'm wondering if there's a difference between that, or what y'all think about these like different kind of parables. Yes.
Well, we're all one, right? I mean, so we're all connected. So we reflect, in my opinion, we reflect the cosmos. And to leave the cosmos out of any discussion about what is happening with us personally or as a group or as a planet or as a people is, again, in my opinion, having too narrow a view of consciousness. So I have to include in my discussions the cosmos, and with that there is a larger galactic sun than what our sun is, which is called the white sun, I believe, in some esoteric traditions, and Steiner especially. That is larger and does shine upon our sun and power our sun. You know, what gives our sun power also, and charge it up. So I think what happens is when we become so immersed in the earth and in our life and in our death and in just the smallness that we create of life, that's when we become susceptible to trance. It's when we have a large, immense view of life, of how everything's interconnected, that we're much harder to fool.
Yeah, less fragmented.
Because we know no one controls us. Jupiter controls me more than Fauci by far. So, that's what I see. Anybody else? I also have this other diagram here of the universal seesaw, which we discussed about before, about every sphere is of equal mass, and so on and so forth. And this is kind of what Russell sees as the universal seesaw, as the direction. We have this centripetal and centrifugal forces working, radiation, gravitation, in and out, creating the planets as they go, the expansion pressure of radiation and then the contraction pressure of gravitation. So, Russell has a very good handle on this, gravitation, radiation, and uses that within a lot of his explanations within the periodic table and so on also. So there's a lot more to Russell when it comes to matter and its manifestation, but how he understands quite a bit about that, the kind of the physics of it, when it comes to how we actually manifest and how the human manifests it. That's where I think he may not be quite deep enough on that. He's very deep on the other scientific side of it.
He disagrees though with Newton and Kepler. I mean, he says they're just wrong. He doesn't even question it like not like maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's because he comes from a place of knowing. So within and this could be a downside of knowing, is that we but again, we each have our own reality. We each have our own knowing. We each have our own, I don't know if there is. As once said, how many religions are there? There's as many as there are people in the world, right? Because nobody, I believe, everybody believes the same thing. And everybody sees the same thing. That's why we're all unique. And we're not robots, and we're not all made the same. We don't all look the same. So I don't know, if each person may see it a bit differently and may create it a bit differently. Each cook has the way he makes his cake could be different. Those are things I don't know, and I'd have to go into intuition and knowing to find that out.
So is entropy just a third dimensional thing, or is this like kind of,
Entropy, you mean so far as like the disintegration?
yeah?
That'd be the radiation. See, that's as we radiate, we begin to, disband. As we concentrate in gravitation, we begin to condense. So entropy would be part of the death cycle, or the other side of the wave, which would be the radiation cycle.